Great. Thanks very much, Dennis. It's very kind of you. No, and it's great to be back in Russia and in Moscow, even though it is a little hot. All right. But, okay, so my lecture is meant to be light relief from all the other hard work that you'll get, but I thought I would tell you the sort of things that we've been doing with things like machine learning in scientific fields. So some of you are not computer scientists, and I hope you'll find some of the content of interest. So first of all, I'm going to talk about what data-intensive scientific discovery is, fourth paradigm, and so on. I want to talk then about a subject that's rather dear to my heart, the fact that in order that we solve some of the problems facing the world, we need to make open science that should be across borders, it should be shared and open. And also, I then wish to convince you, if you need convincing, that the cloud is a very significant element in the way we will do our science in the future, as well, of course, for industry. So data-intensive science, what do I mean by that? Well, you saw from Geoffrey Fox this morning, he talked about 3 V's. I like to characterize it: volume, obviously petabytes is a large number, variety. It turns out that astronomy and physics tend to have petabytes of data, but in fact, it's much the same character of data. And the complexity in something like in bioinformatics, where you have gene sequences, then you have gene expression data, which shows you what proteins are made, what the protein structures, the pathways. It's just incredibly complex data. So it isn't as large, but it's very different, and getting knowledge and understanding from that very varied data is clearly a difficult task. And then Geoffrey talked about streaming data. So you'll have sensor networks, the Internet of Things and so on, where sensor data comes streaming in, and you have to pick out significant signals from all that data. And so velocity of the data is important. And lastly, the veracity, by which I mean the trust. What's been done with that data? What manipulations have been done on it? Can you understand where it came from? What were the conditions? What were the settings? Sounds very mundane, but it's very important if you wish science to be repeatable. There's a famous study done by a company called Amgen, who looked at research papers in Science and Nature, and they looked at 53 papers, and their scientists were only able to reproduce the results of 7 of those 53 papers. So reproducibility is a problem, and so that's what I really mean under the veracity headline. So the very largest volumes, you have big experiments like the Large Hadron Collider, like the big telescopes, and they have large budgets and money for software. The vast majority of people are sort of much lower data sets where there is not a huge software budget and they have to use the tools around. And so creating tools that people use, people find useful, that's a very important part of data science. So when I came to Microsoft Research, one of the reasons I joined Microsoft was because of Jim Gray. This is him on his boat. This is the boat that he was lost at sea on this boat and died some years ago. And he was one of the people who had realized way back as early as 2000 or so the importance of working with scientists on their data sets, because you could test out computer science technologies, see which worked. You have big data sets. He used to like to say he worked with the astronomy community, and he liked the astronomy community because the astronomy data was absolutely no commercial value, which means you don't have to worry about whether it's privacy and things like that. You can do what you like with it. So he built lots of interesting things, and I'll say a little bit about what he did. So the first thing he did was work with astronomers, and he worked in particular on a thing called the Virtual Observatory, where the astronomers were getting together and they wanted to build a very big software system where you could put all the different data from the different photographs of the sky, not only in the visible, but the infrared, the radio, ultraviolet, the X-ray and gamma ray and so on. All these different visions of the sky, and they wanted to put it all together. But Jim Gray got so frustrated by the discussions that he and an astronomer called Alex Saleh and some graduate students decided they'd build for the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, which was the first big high-resolution survey of a quarter of the night sky, would build one of the first web services to make that data available to anybody on the web. And that's what they did, and it was a transformative event. So these sky surveys are now becoming much more sophisticated, but they all go back to this. That's why I've called it the cosmic genome. It's like doing the human genome, but this was the big thing for astronomy, and you have 300 million celestial objects in there, and there are only about 10,000 or so astronomers professionally. So what do? So you publish the data before you've written your papers, because you're never going to get round to 300 million. And so that gives an opportunity for general public to do citizen science, and there's a project called the Zooniverse, which actually uses citizens to help classify galaxies, and that's been an interesting project. So that was one of the projects he worked on. The other project he worked on was with biological data. So this was with the US National Library of Medicine, and there they were actually building a database called PubMed Central, where they were putting the full text of all the papers. So it isn't just the abstracts, it's the full text of the papers. They wanted to capture in that database all the papers that have been funded by the US government, the National Institutes of Health. All those papers, they wanted the authors to put them into PubMed Central. And when they got them in there, you could go from the paper to the various data that had been used to derive the results, these databases, and they'd built a cross-database search. And this was the vision Jim had for the way science should be, that you should go from the papers to the data that the papers were based on, to be able to look at other data related to it and produce new results that way. So this was his contribution, was actually making a portable version of this database that is now used in the UK, the rest of Europe, in Canada, that people are now making it, putting their research papers online so anybody from Moscow, from wherever, can access them. So that was the beginning, two of the projects that Jim was involved in, and his experience with these projects led him to think about what he was seeing in these data projects was a new way. You had to train students differently. Previously, we've always done science by experimental measurements, of course, and then with Galileo, Copernicus, Kepler, Newton, and Maxwell, and so on, we'd managed to codify a lot of that data into laws of nature which we express mathematically. And so you could explore science through these laws of nature by doing analytical calculations, and then you could test them experimentally. And these two ways of doing science, experiment and theory, are the way that science has been done for hundreds of years. But in the 1950s, people started building computers. And computers enabled you to do things that you couldn't do using the analytic tools. It was too complicated. You could do simulations of this. If you want to do galaxy formation, you can't do the experiment, but you can do a simulation of it. It's too difficult, too complex, too many variables to solve analytically, but you can do a simulation of it. So galaxy formation, climate change, weather forecasting, all of these things actually involve computers. And as you know, computers were developed early on in the US, in the UK, in Russia. Lebedev and developed computers, very early computers at the same time. And this enabled you to actually explore what Ken Wilson, he was a physics Nobel Prize winner in the 1970s, he called this the third paradigm of doing science, because it was different. The faculty, the research professors, the students, they had to know about numerical methods, they had to know about algorithms, they had to know about computers, parallel programming, MPI, and all these things. So nowadays, with data-intensive science, many fields have more data than they can deal with. And you need to know how to manipulate, to organize data in databases with schema, how to reorganize it, how to mine it, how to visualize it. Again, a different set of skills. It's not the same set of skills as for computation, and it obviously uses theory and experiment, but it's a new set of skills in managing data. And the program that I ran in the UK, EScience program, was very similar to Jim's vision. EScience was about the tools you need to go do that, to do analysis, data mining, visualizing, and eventually publishing and disseminating. And so we wrote a book which you can actually download on the web. It's available under a Creative Commons license, so if you want a copy of the book, just go to the website and get it. And so the fourth paradigm, my job as an editor was to get a scientist and a computer scientist together to write an article. And my job was to bully them to not write a very detailed scientific article which very few people could read and understand. I wanted them to write an essay that would be readable by a large audience. So my role was to bully them, and my other co-editors did all the work to make it look nice. And Science at Microsoft just gives lots of examples of the projects we've done with computer scientists and scientists working together. So it's a selection of projects that you can find. So Jim Gray's group, when Jim died, it was taken over by David Heckerman. I managed to persuade David to take on what's now called the EScience group. And David Heckerman runs a computational biology group within there. He was the leader of the machine learning in Microsoft Research, but now he's also got an MD, he's a doctor, and so he wants to apply machine learning to a set of interesting problems. So these are some of the things that they're doing. Identifying genetic causes of disease. In particular, one of the things they're trying to do is fight HIV/AIDS, and I'll say a little bit more about that. And also, in Brazil, we have a project trying to understand the genome for sugarcane, because sugarcane in Brazil, most of their cars run on ethanol, not gasoline, and that they get from sugarcane. And if you could, with climate change, you're going to have warmer climates, less rainfall, and you need to have varieties of sugarcane which can make ethanol even in those conditions. So that's what they do. The HIV/AIDS work, just to say a little bit of word about it. So David Heckerman was one of the first people to use machine learning to develop the first spam filter in your email. And what does the spammer need to do? He needs to tell you what he's selling, and he needs to get money from you. And so he can disguise it with all sorts of stuff in the email, but ultimately there are 2 points that he has to make clear. You have to understand what he's selling, and also he has to be able to get money from you. So those are the 2 points. And so you can train the system on lots of emails, ones which are clearly spam, ones which are not, and the system can learn which is spam. And that's what they do. You go after these 2 weak links that they have to tell you what they're selling, they have to, even though they may try to disguise it, and they have also to have a way of getting your money. And so the idea in HIV, the virus mutates very much, and that's the problem. Influenza mutates once a year. The HIV virus mutates as much in 1 year as influenza does in 20 years. And it's different in each of us. So when you train a vaccine for it to attack the virus, it doesn't do any good because the virus will mutate. And the points that you're attacking on, it can just mutate away. So if you can pin it down to points on the virus that it cannot mutate away, that it's actually unable to mutate, then you can actually hope to kill the virus. So this is the methodology that we're working with researchers at Massachusetts General Hospital to try and develop a vaccine which could be effective against HIV. So, just some examples. Let me say a little bit about open access to research publications. I told you about PubMed Central. Well, I think 2013 is the tipping point when it will be required, if you get a grant from your government, that you put your paper so anybody can read it, that you don't have to pay extra to read it. There will still be journals, but you'll also have a copy that you'll be able to get. And so these are some of the landmarks. There was, in the US, the White House made an announcement in 2013 requiring all the funding agencies like the National Science Foundation and so on to make their research publications available. The Global Research Council, that's all the agencies who fund research around the world, the National Science Foundation in the US, the research councils in the UK, and so on, and I believe Russia was a part of that. Also said they want to do that, and the G8 science ministers also said that they want to have this available. So I think 2013 was a very significant year, and just as one typical example is the University of California. It's a very significant university. It has many campuses. Berkeley you've heard of, UCLA probably as well. Largest public research university in the world, and it publishes about 40,000 publications a year. It has 8% of all the research funding in the US. Well, the policy they've adopted requires all their 8,000 faculty to put their research papers in the University of California e-scholarship repository. That's a repository where you can go and have a look and see their papers. And so that's the policy of the University of California, and the publishers are working with them to make that work. So I think you will be able to see all the papers published by any American university, British university, and so on, Chinese university. I talked about the National Institutes of Health and PubMed Central, which is where their papers are published. And it's interesting, when it was voluntary, only 20% of the people put their papers in there. It was signed into law by George Bush in 2007, and the number of people who put their papers in, because they were supposed to do it by law, went up to 75%. But last year, they started saying, well, if you haven't put your papers in, we're not going to give you your next research grant. And as a result, the compliance rate has gone up to over 90%. So you do need to have some coercion to make people do it. But that means you will be able to see all the papers that are funded by the National Institutes of Health. You can see a copy of everything that they do. Open data. So that's the research publications, but many of them are built on data. Some of them are theory, but some of them actually depend on data sets. So for open science, you need to have the data as well as the publication. This is a slide, actually. I just joined Microsoft Research, and this is a slide that Bill Gates used in a talk he gave at the Supercomputing Conference in Seattle. And it's about the fact that with electronic publications, you have a whole new range of options that you don't have on a paper publication. So the data can be, if you want to find out what the data is, you click on it, you can go to where the data is actually stored. The graph, if you want to see something different, you want to rotate it, you want to find out what the program that produced it, you want to change some parameters, you can go and manipulate the figure, the graph, and plot different things. And so documents can be dynamic. There can be different ways, instead of just citations, about whether this paper is interesting or not. So there's, you can follow, for example, you could follow Paul Watson or Tony Hay, which papers they liked, and you always paid no attention to Tony Hay's recommendations, but Paul Watson's were always really sensible. And so there are different ways you can actually get significance, because we're publishing in PubMed, which is the abstracts, there are 3 papers deposited per minute every minute of the year. And that's too many papers for us to read. How do we find out which papers are significant? So electronic publishing is a new era, and this is just beginning. In 2003, a group of funding agencies in Germany and in Europe got together and had a declaration about the need for open data as well as open publications. So original scientific research results, raw data with the metadata, that's the data about the data, telling you what it is, and the source materials and so on. So that really needs to be made available, and that's what this group said. And similarly, the G8 science ministers also stressed the importance of open data. You have to have the data available so people can check your results. People can add to your data with their data and make new discoveries. And so that was the idea. And with the data available, you can make companies. You can actually have commercial companies acting on this data, making a service that people will pay for. So not only publishing your paper online, but publishing the data is going to be important. And in the US, there's 3 initiatives from the USA. The NSF now insists when you write a proposal that you have a data management plan in your proposal. Now, most of my colleagues didn't know what a data management plan was, but you have to figure out what you're going to do with the data, how you're going to make it available to others. The expectation is that after you've published your paper, you will make the data available to others. And similarly, there's the National Institutes of Health, and data.gov is governmental data is made available. Now, there are many complications about sharing data, and in the medical arena, in particular, people care very much about personal privacy. It's my data. I don't want to share details of my data. So these 2 examples, to me, are very heartening and very surprising in a way. So this is Alzheimer's disease, and so these are a number of centers who are doing studies on Alzheimer's disease. And instead of just having a small number from this center and a small number from this center, they've agreed to pool their data. All right? And so 14 centers, and they've remarkably agreed to put their data in a common database. And in fact, on this data, other people who didn't take the data have been able to use it and make discoveries, research papers. So it's a remarkable example that even though you might worry about privacy concerns, these people have overcome those problems and genuinely sharing data. And there's another example about autism research. And then these are different charities who may have 100,000 people in here, but this charity has 100,000. But if you put them together, you get more. And so they've agreed standards for how to merge, because they've got different ways of storing them, but they've agreed how to merge them. And actually now they have what they call community science, because they brought all these together, and by bringing them together, they've got much bigger data sets to find things out. So I think it's possible to do good science with shared open data. I said that you want to go from the publication to the data that it's based on. Well, actually, that's not normally very easy. And so let's just look at where the state of the art is. And the state of the art, I think, is actually in the astrophysicists. There's a thing called the astrophysics data system, slightly confusingly because it's really about publications. But for each of the publications, there's links to data and links to objects. They also have, in Strasbourg, a data center which collects the data sets for astronomy and looks after them. And so you can connect these 2 resources, the publications and the data. And this is a vision of Professor Alyssa Goodman in Harvard. She sees this as seamless astronomy. You have over here, you have the astrophysics data sets, the papers, and over here you have the data. And then you have tools to link them together. And that's actually where astronomy is going, and they're actually beginning to actually link the papers to the data. And so one example that we're actually looking at, collaborating with Harvard, is a thing called the Dataverse, where we're actually going from a journal paper to a database, and this is this system called the Dataverse, and we're putting that in the cloud and seeing how that works up in the cloud. But there's a problem, and the problem is this, that this is shows you which of the links. So if I look at 2001, 44% of the links in 2001 that were in the papers, if you click on them now, they would not work. They wouldn't. The links would be broken. And so you need to have data with a link that is a URI that's maintained and doesn't disappear, and the website disappears and so on. So actually making these data sets still be retrievable 10 years later is a real issue, and how you make this data so it can be used for others to build on. But that's the vision of Jim Gray. Jim Gray's vision, this is a slide from his last talk, was that you'll be able to go from the literature to the data, be able to take more data, put it together, write a paper, and continue the process. And he, and I agree with him, feel that there's a lot of inefficiencies in the way we do science at the moment, and if we could actually make something like this work with distributed repositories of data and publications around the world, you would be able to increase the way we do science, to spend our money much more efficiently and solve some of the problems that the world is facing in health and environment in a much more effective way. A huge increase in science productivity, Jim says. So if you like, this is a global digital library with the publications and data. Okay, so that's a sort of background. Let me talk a little bit about where I think we're going for big data, cloud, and data science and stuff like this. So I think the three technologies I'd like to talk about a little bit. One is about machine learning, which is really, I think, at an exciting time. The other is about a story about visualization, which I would like to say, and then, of course, about the cloud. And I'll talk a little bit more about clouds, obviously, than the other two. But let's talk about machine learning. So Jeffrey talked about some of the algorithms for machine learning. And roughly speaking, we're familiar with computers for doing storing, computing, managing, and indexing large amounts of data. Google and Microsoft index the web, for example, on a regular basis. So you can do lots of things with computers. But what we really need, with all these huge amounts of papers, huge amounts of data coming in, we really need computers to be more intelligent and to act automatically to help you with the acquisition, the aggregation, the correlation, the interpretation, discovery, organization, analysis, and to help make inferences from that data. So we need help, and that's what we'd like the computers to be a bit smarter to be able to do that. And that's the challenge, and machine learning is a step on the road to doing that. So currently there's great excitement in the machine learning community. It's all about these things called deep neural nets. So there's artificial neural networks, which usually had one intermediate layer between an input layer and an output layer. Now they've got multiple layers, and what they've found is that for some really interesting problems like natural language processing, speech, and stuff like that, after not making much progress for 10 years or so in computer science, we now can get much better, much closer to what a human can do. So for speech processing on certain conditions, we can get very close to as good as a human. So that's a very exciting thing. And similarly, in vision problems, a small child can tell the difference in a picture between a cat and a dog, but a computer has a hard time. Well, now we can actually train computers using these new techniques. We can train them to do that. And Microsoft has a digital assistant called Cortana, and you'll see, I can point you to images on the web where you can talk to Cortana and ask her to recognize a particular breed of dog, and she can do that. So you've really made dramatic progress in complicated vision problems, as well as natural language processing and speech processing. So that's why people are excited. People think that these big challenges have been around since the early days of computer science, from the early AI, artificial intelligence enthusiasm. We're now making real progress, and people see that they are going to be able to build lots of intelligent systems which approach human intelligence. Well, okay, so that's in computer science. That's why Google, Facebook, Yandex, no doubt, are all very excited about machine learning. But also in science, it's very important. And I'll give some examples of how in science, with what's called Bayesian techniques, where when you get more data, you can improve your prediction, are becoming important. So let's look at an example. So in our research laboratory in Europe, in Cambridge, England, we have a group that does computational ecology and environmental science. And so they're looking at lots of things like climate data, species and ecological monitoring animals and insects in the wild, and they're doing a lot of computational modeling. But they're trying to do it in a different way, and one of the problems they're looking at is the global carbon climate feedback model. Now that's extremely important. You know, what happens to all the carbon dioxide, and what's the take-up in the sea and in the earth. So in particular, on land, with the rotting leaves and trees and stuff like that, it's a very uncertain. People don't know in detail what happens and what the models are. And so if you look in detail at the models for the carbon take-up on the land, it's very uncertain. So obviously you fit fairly well the past data, because that's how you constrain your model. But you can see they diverge very dramatically as you go further in this century. And that matters. In one of these things, the Earth takes up a lot of carbon, and in the other one, it doesn't. So one way we're all going to be toast, and the other one, we're okay. So what is the truth? And can you find out what data you need to do to constrain your model so you're more certain? And that's what they've been trying to do. They've been trying to actually find out by looking at particular sets of data where you could improve your predictions. Where is the uncertainty, and what data do you need to take to reduce the uncertainty? So they've been looking at these models. And so what they give then with all this analysis is they give predictions with a probability, because that's all you can do. And so these are the probability bands for various parameters. So they're trying to use probabilistic machine learning techniques to understand how you can refine these climate models so we can know more about it. That's just one example. So machine learning is important, all right? What about visualization? Well, the data sets are very complex. Certainly in the case of climate, there's all sorts of different data. There's sea temperature, there's air temperature, there's CO2, there's all sorts of different parameters that you can measure. So you really need to try and explain that in new ways. And so this is a paper that actually Jim Gray wrote way back in 2002, where he, with Alex Saleh, they asked for what you need is some sort of visualization tool, like a worldwide telescope was the word they used for online science. And the idea was that you could transform science. You had this explosion of data, but you could make the data useful, so you could do visual queries. You could understand your data visually, and then you could make detailed predictions. So exploring the data with a visual tool they felt was vitally important. And so this is the thing that Jim Gray built with Alex Saleh and two grad students. They built this SkyServer, which was a website that you can go to now, and you can go and look at all these wonderful pictures that was taken by the Sloan telescope, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. And so this inspired a researcher who is also now in the EScience group, Curtis Wong, to actually try and see what you could do to build a visualization tool for that. And so he had this idea, can you visualize the universe? And these are some of the images that you want to put in. So there's the visible, there's the infrared, the ultraviolet, and so on. And so what he wanted to build was a tool that you could use for education, for exciting students into understanding the stars, but also you could use for research. And that's what he built with Worldwide Telescope. And Worldwide Telescope is something that Curtis Wong and Jonathan Fay built in my group in Microsoft Research. And they worked with astronomers Alex Saleh from Johns Hopkins and Alissa Goodman from Harvard to build an interesting site and to look at the data in exciting new ways. So integration of data sets, so you can just click on them. It's easy to use, has over 4 million unique users, and now it's also now available, a version which works in the browser, so it'll work on your Macs, it'll work on your PC, it'll work on Android or Linux. And so what we should do in a moment is just have a look. But I wanted just to tell you what one of the nice features of this tool is, that you can do a guided tour. So if you want to look, for example, at the Milky Way, you can look at the Milky Way in the visible, but you can also look at it in the infrared and in the X-ray, and you can look and see different parameters. And you can follow an expert astronomer as they take you through the different data sets. They can look at it and they can explain what's happening. So they can give you what's called a tour through the data. And this is Curtis Wong there. He gave a TED talk on this. You can see his TED talk on Worldwide Telescope. And he's actually, as you can see, visualizing and explaining. And that's what a tour is. You can follow it just like a video, but you can stop and examine and so on, or continue. And so it's a new way of looking at these data sets, which is really, I think, a powerful thing to do. So let me see if I can actually go to the web. This is always a bad idea. But let's see. So this is Worldwide Telescope. Whoop. I thought it was. Why is it showing that? That's very interesting. I give up. All right. So I invite you to look at Worldwide Telescope, to download the browser and have a look yourselves. On that one, on the web. Hold it. You mean E? P. Yes. Great. Thank you very much, guys. Yes. Okay. So sorry about that. That's what I meant to do. So you can look at guided tours, for example, here, and you can look at I don't know. Let's go up that one and go to galaxies. And so these are tours made by various people. 7 top galaxies, impact of M31, interesting objects. So let's look at Curtis Wong. So this is what you can do. It can zoom in down to, this is the M82 gravitational star cluster. You can zoom in and see that's the Hubble telescope image of this. And then you can explore it in various details. You can go to some other part of the galaxy. These are the traditional constellations. You can go to this one. You can look at the different objects in this galaxy, and you can compare. These are 2 colliding galaxies and stuff like that. Okay, so let's stop that for a moment. And let me go back to this. That's very interesting. Great, okay, fine. Phew, all right. Okay, so I believe with complex data sets, a tool for doing digital storytelling is important. And so this is looking at the heavens, but you can also look at the Earth. And so this is a tool we've made called Layerscape, which uses the same engine and enables you to do tours looking at various data on the Earth. So this is plotting, for example, seismic events over the year on the globe. And you can immediately see the tectonic plates. This is the mid-ocean spreading in the Atlantic. On the left, you can see the Ring of Fire on South America and so on. And similarly, you can actually go and explore the time sequence of events and the depth that there happens. So these are earthquakes in Japan. This is the Tohoku, the big event. And what's shown here is a model of the tectonic plates, one sliding under another, done by some seismologist. And so you can explore, you can fly around your image, you can do various things. So that was what the researchers did. They worked on the visualization tool for pure science. And the interesting thing is that we managed, after 5 years, to transfer that as to a tool for business. And so how did that come about? Well, this is what we were doing. We were visualizing stars in a universe of data, interactive guided tours. And now we can actually do that in Excel with the data set in Excel. We can, for example, look at, I don't know, that's probably bicycle thefts in Seattle, all right? You can look at tours, you can look at the data, you can see how it happens in time, you can play sequences in time, and you can do fly-throughs of these things. So it's like doing a PowerPoint presentation. You can do these tours very easily, and the sort of things that you see here, it's called Power Map for Excel, and you can plot all these different types of data and explore how they change with time and stuff like that. So it shows that working on science problems does have impact on really larger applications. Let me talk a bit about the cloud. You all are here to learn about the cloud, and you all know that industry is building out a massive cloud infrastructure. This is a probably out-of-date slide. Dennis must have a more modern version of this. But this shows... I do. You do, yes, okay. So you showed something like this. Not yet. Okay, so Dennis will show an updated version. But these are some of the data centers around the world. There are more being built as we speak. And besides these very massive data centers with hundreds of thousands of cores, there are also smaller data centers which, if you like, stage data nearer where you are. If you're in Australia, you need some edge servers. And obviously these blue lines connecting them are these fiber optic cables because you need to have very big bandwidth. So people like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and others are building out these things. And these are the sort of traditional advantages. For the services are always there. As long as you have an internet access, you can get them. You can share data easily. You can collaborate easily. And for me, it's also important that you can compute and store stuff as you need. So I was the dean of engineering in my university. One of the things I was particularly concerned about was getting smart grad students, undergraduates, faculty, to help them start companies if that's what they wanted to do. And this is a way you can do it much easier. You don't need to buy lots of computing infrastructure. You can use the cloud very cheaply, and as you get more customers, you can grow. You can pay as you grow. So it gives you a much easier startup phase for a business. 2 undergraduates can go and just start and rent a few servers in the cloud. So it really makes a difference. It also makes a difference if you think about devices like this. This is, of course, a Windows phone as opposed to an iPhone or an Android. But when I speak into it, to our version of Siri, I think called Cortana, the speech processing is not done in the phone. It's done up in the cloud. And it's done in such a way that you get an answer in less than a second. So it converts these devices by using cloud resources into a mobile supercomputer, if you like, that I can actually be on an archaeological dig and I can actually have a tablet or a phone and actually access the resources in the cloud to do serious stuff for computing. So the cloud really changes the nature of what you can do. What have we done in terms of science? Well, we did a project on the Wellcome Trust data for 7 common diseases. We have some algorithms. One is called FAST LMM. LMM stands for Linear Mixed Model. And it's to do with removing spurious correlations from the data. When you have a data set for genome-wide association studies, it's not just one person's genome, but a whole population. And maybe some people have all come from the same region, and there are correlations between them that you didn't expect. You have to remove this confounding data. And so what the group under David Heckerman have done have been able to transform the way you do that with this algorithm. Previously, it grew cubic with the size of your data population. They've produced a version of this algorithm which grows linearly. And that means instead of being able to only do, say, 10,000 people, you can now do hundreds, and that hundreds of thousands. And that makes a big difference. You can pick up much smaller signals and so on. So this was one where they were doing a trial to see, using the cloud, can you do a really significant, difficult calculation? So here they were looking not at single variations, these SNPs, but pairs. And they looked at pairs of SNPs for this particular database from the Wellcome Trust for 7 common diseases. And they used 27,000 cores in the cloud. So, you know, on one computer it would have taken you 1,000 years. Here it was done in a couple of weeks. And what they found and published a result on was a correlation between these two particular variants and coronary heart disease. So you can find real new scientific discoveries. You can use huge computing power in the cloud, which would not normally be available to ordinary medical researchers. So by partnering with the medical researchers, by bringing computation to them, you can actually find new and exciting results. So I'm sure, Dennis, you've been talking about Microsoft Azure for Research, presumably.
We'll get to that later.
Okay, fine. But it's a way you can actually write proposals and be given a fair amount of time, provided you're selected. But Dennis will tell you about that. But it's a way for doing serious experiments with a serious amount of time and serious amount of storage. This week, the White House announced the second phase of its Climate Data Initiative. And what that is they want to worry about food sustainability and how you're going to feed this growing population. And we've been working with the US Department of Agriculture to put some of their data in the Azure data marketplace. Here there are lots of different data sets, and now you can go here and pick up a tag called agriculture, and you will find data sets from the US Department of Agriculture, and you can actually go and analyze these and study these. So this is a convenient place to put data, to store public data sets, and to be able to use them free of charge. So the cloud, I think, is here to stay for science as well as for business. What about data science in the future? So Jeffrey said a few remarks about data science, and I'll say a few more. So if I look in a well-known search engine, I guess I should have used Yandex, but I use Bing here to look up data science, and these are some of the things you find. The hottest job you haven't heard of, the new gig in tech, data scientists mine, visualize, and learn. So it's a very hot topic at the moment. So what actually is a data scientist? Well, it's many things, really. And here I just pick out 3 particular elements of a data science, and it's unlikely that one person will do all 3. But there's people who go and get the data, people who actually take the data from the satellite, reconstruct it, put it in data sets that the scientists can use, for example, operating at very low levels close to where the data comes in, and they have to know what's been done to the data. They have to record what's been done in their workflow. And then there are people who are data analysts. These are the people who actually go and look at the data, maybe through visualization, maybe through statistical and analytical methods, and find significant signals in that data. So those are two roles that are typical for computer science, for example, and electrical engineering. But there's also a third role, which, if you like, is more the information or library school, which is of data steward. Having spent a lot of money to get this data, you may want to be able to record it and to be able to retrieve it 10 years from now and still be able to read it and so on. So preservation and curation of this data, librarians and data librarians, data repository people, it's a third element. So these are three different aspects of a data scientist, which will all have specific jobs associated with them. And I had an email, I think it was 2 weeks ago, from Microsoft's Human Resources movement. And the email said the following. It was just defining what Microsoft means by a data science. So this is Microsoft's definition. It said, data and applied scientists, there are three roles: data scientist, machine learning scientist, applied scientist. I'm not quite sure what those mean, but this is what it said underneath. Apply rigorous scientific methodology to data to discover and frame relevant problems, hypotheses, or opportunities, and drive actionable insight, tools, technology, or methods into the device, product, service development process to achieve customer and business goals. So that's what Microsoft says about data science. So I'd just like to finish with one example which I think brings big data, machine learning together in a way that's compelling. Some years ago, there were some bad fires near Moscow, really bad forest fires. And in Greece, some years ago, there were these very bad forest fires in 2007, which really nearly threatened a large part of Greece. Killed over 50 people and destroyed thousands of houses. And this is the blaze as it was quite close to the suburbs of Athens. It was a really serious thing. Now, in Greece, they have lots of islands in the Mediterranean, and if you could imagine a serious fire on one of these islands, it could completely annihilate the whole island. So people are concerned about that, and so we put together a project with Microsoft employees from Greece and researchers from Greece, and we worked with the University of Aegean, University of Athens, and Microsoft in Greece to actually look at a particular island. This is the island of Lesbos, actually. And what we were trying to do was actually help the fire chief, the person in charge of the emergency services, look and assess the dangers. Is it more dangerous over here? If the fire starts here, which direction will it go? Where's the wind blowing? So you had to put all this data together. And so the sorts of data that they put together was they wanted to calculate and visualize the risk of ignition of a fire and where it would go. Right? And so you could actually do the calculations for that using the cloud, because on a computer, on a Greek island, you don't have a supercomputer, but you do have the cloud, right? And this would enable you to tell the fire chief where they should put their resources. So the data sources were really quite a lot. You had the weather model, so it was a real-time simulation from the weather forecasters, as well as information from satellites, which is real-time, real information, as well as the simulation. You need to know the vegetation on the island. You need to know the topography, whether it's mountainous, valleys, and so on. And you need to know the road networks, the fire history, all these different things. And you put all those together, and you build a system using machine learning, which can give you predictions with probabilities. And so this is the risk of fire ignition based on a 5-day forecast, a simple visualization. This is based on the current weather as opposed to a 5-day forecast. This is what will happen, which way the fire would go, if with the prevailing wind, where would it go? So these are the sort of things that you can give to the guy who runs all these resources. He can know where to go and send his people, he knows where his fire engines are and so on, and he can take appropriate action. And so I thought I would like to leave you with is that big data with machine learning using the cloud allows you to give informed, intelligent decisions. And that's true in this Greek fire example, but it's also true much more generally. And I think that's really the challenge. What I like about working with scientists is that you can actually use the techniques with scientists, understand their problems, but the skills that you learn in doing that are also useful for industry. So you have the capability of being employed with scientists or with industry, and therefore it's a pretty good career path for young graduates. Thank you very much for listening. Yes?
So were the project on wheat fire effective? So did you have some practice results like preventing fires or placation in your early stages, something like that?
We had the history of fires on that island, so we knew where fires had happened, and they were able to normalize to some extent their model against fires that had happened, yes. They were able to do some of that. But I don't know in detail. I mean, do you know any more?
Yeah, they had a history, quite a bit of history. They had history of weather records for different dates. They had simulation models. They had instruments buried in the ground that had humidity readings, so they knew at any given time how dry the grass and the plants were. They could compare that with the past. It was quite a bit of data integration. Very interesting project.
No, it was.
And the tool in the end, and this was very exciting, I saw a video of it, the actual fire people were using it.
The fire chief.
Yeah, that's the exciting.
No, sorry, no, it's actually, I believe, still in use, right?
Yeah.
So it's... Anyway, so, but there were big fires near Moscow not long ago, and I think this is, with climate change and global warming, this may be a more common scenario that you want to. And that's in the case of the environment. You can imagine similar applications in hospitals and things like that. So there are many types of applications. This is using data from an environmental problem, but you could imagine other problems.
All right, well, thank you, Tony.
That's great.